Thank you again for inviting me here to interrogate you mercilessly.
Bring it.
Well, in the just a reminder of Mia Mosquito, was that the name?
Rita Mosquito.
Rita Mosquito. That is the best name of all time.
It is the best name.
It's hard to avoid feeling hopeless. And what should keep us, in your mind, from just throwing our hands up and giving up on all this?
Very good question. I imagine it's on a lot of people's mind in the audience. And so the first thing is, as I mentioned, it was a little over 3 years ago when I was in Marfa in residency working up the introduction to this book. And I had reams of data, just printouts of all the climate dispatches I'd done, and was completely overwhelmed. Was pulling together each chapter, putting in everything that was going to be probably cited. And at one point, while I was there, I was also thankfully engaged in doing a weekly meditation group with my friend there, Nick Terry, who leads in meditation. And Nick and I would occasionally have coffee. And he'd come over and we'd talk, and he'd ask me how it was going on the book. And at one point, I was in total overwhelm with all that information, and I just said, I don't even know why I should write this book. Like, what good is it going to do? What difference does it make? And he says, Dahr, I understand. I get that feeling. But, if the sum total, if you write this book and a lot of people read it, and if the sum total of that book is that one tiny little organism in the Amazon gets one more week of life on this planet, then it's worth it. Amen. And to add to that, 2 days from now, students from over 72 countries around the planet are walking out of school. And if the kids are doing this, what am I doing?
Exactly.
What are we doing? What are we doing? And is it enough? And why am I holding back from taking a radical step, making some serious changes? If the kids are doing this, what are we doing?
Well, it brings me to my next question. What can we do individually not to fix anything, because you made it abundantly clear that fixing is in the rearview mirror. What can we do to prepare for where we're going?
Well, it's interesting. It's been outlined, one train of thought is there's kind of three different ways to think about what to do. There's the people we can fix it. There's, the mitigation. Let's do what we can to try to mitigate it. Maybe keep us, instead of reaching, this level of temperature increase, keep it down to here. And then there's how do we adapt? And the fix-its are the New Green Deal, the Extinction Rebellion, and all of these things. And I don't want to sound in any way that I'm being deprecated or negative about these. I think they're all honorable and valuable and imperative things to do. And God knows we need to do all of them squared to try to, make this situation even just a little bit better. Yeah. But then there's the mitigation, which is, soil regeneration, planting more trees. What can we do? Let's reduce the CO2. All these things that we can do, because if there's any possibility at all, we can keep us from even just shaving 1 C off future temperature projections, then that's absolutely imperative, and we have no idea. That 1 C might be the determining factor of whether humans make it or not, or how many other species. And then the other is adaptation, is what do we need to do right now to start adapting? And so, for example, does it make sense to still be building on coasts? Probably not. It probably makes more sense to start relocation processes already for major coastal cities, et cetera.
One of the many striking things I remember from your book was the fact that, and I've mentioned this to a few people since I read it, and everybody, when you run into people who still cling to the idea that this isn't happening, I always tell them, follow the money. There are mining and shipping interests that are pouncing all over the new sea lanes that are opening because the ice is gone and not coming back, even as the politicians and the wealthy industrialists to invest in this, pretended it's not happening. You cannot get a 30-year mortgage in Miami Beach anymore. Think about that. Follow the money.
Always.
Dahr, you've heard me probably not shut up since we've gotten here about my little girl who's turning 6 next month, born on April Fool's Day. How in the world do I prepare her for this? How do people prepare their children for this, for everything that's coming?
I think that has to be the single most challenging question on this topic that, any of us can ever deal with. And it's one that I think everybody in this room, whether we have our own children or not, has to deal with. And again, it comes down, first of all, to the moral obligation of we are morally obliged to do absolutely everything in our power to help them, to take care of them, to leave this planet. It used to be leave it a better place. Now maybe it's leave it a little less worse place.
Clinging to the status quo would be nice.
You're right. But an interesting thing is happening on a little bit of a lighter note on that front is just in my own life, I have a friend who has a niece that lives in Victoria, Canada. Her name's Sienna, and she's 18 years old now. And she was on track to go to college, brilliant young woman, basically could have done whatever she wanted to do, and sees what's happening. She's very involved with the student protests, and she says, look, it really doesn't make a lot of sense for me to go to college because that expects there to be an economy and kind of a business as usual to a certain extent. And so she decided to pull out, and she's doing things like learning metallurgy and electronics and woodworking and tool making, and she's loving it. She's absolutely loving it. She's like, I want to learn how to do things with my hands because to me, that's what's going to be very, very practicable. And it's good. And also there's another woman, a young woman, a good friend of mine, Mark Oates in Australia. His daughter Shayla is 17. She thinks she wants to be a doctor. And it's like, well, that's great. We're going to need doctors for sure, no matter what. So all these different things. And then even more personally, I've had a young man move out and live on the land where I live. Same thing. He pulled out of college. He said, it just doesn't make sense for me to be in college. He just wants to be on the land. He just wants to be on the planet. And so he came out and lived with me for about 9 months and did a lot of climbing. We did a lot together. There was a little bit of self-interest there. He helped with the garden and things like this, and then he moved out, and then he was replaced promptly by his friend who had done the exact same thing. So basically providing space and opportunity for, and I'm very, very lucky and fortunate to be able to do that, to bring these kids out and have them hang out and then have meals together and let's talk about this and also have some fun, and also be with the planet. So I think the most important thing really is, I should have led with this up front, is we have to first be honest.
Yeah.
We can't tell them anymore that everything's going to be okay because it's not. And the thing is, though, what I found is talking to these younger kids, the bit that I've done it so far, and I think this is going to increase, is P.S. Most of them already know.
Yeah.
Most of them already know. Like our generation, there's the grief. There's a lot of grieving that had to happen because of the loss, because there was all this stuff that was there when we were growing up. They're born into it. It's already gone, or they're watching it going, and they know it's going to be gone soon. And they're not grieving. They're pissed.
Tough as nails, too.
They're pissed, and they get it. And they want to go on strike, and they want to shake things up, and they want to take it to the man and say, look, if you're not going to do it, we're going to force the issue.
Excellent.
And to surf on that applause, how much fun can we have supporting that?
Amen. Well, speaking of getting angry, this brings me to one of my favorite Dahr Jamail stories. We work together at Truth Out, and we're a virtual office all over the country, so we communicate using this real-time software. And it was just back in August, I think it was, and all of a sudden, almost literally, my computer started vibrating across the table because he's like, it was one of the myriad articles that keeps coming out with the rosy inflection that, again, something can be done. It's a new beginning, not an obituary or something along those lines, and you were fit to be tied. because it just makes the task of preparing for this so much more difficult. If the UN report is another great example. Oh, we have 12 years, super. No, we don't. So my question to you is, where did people, before action, there needs to be information. Before you can do something, you have to know what's wrong and what you can do. So I wanted to ask you, from your experiences, where can people go to find the relevant, up-to-date, non-rose-colored glasses information about what's happening and what can be done to stave off at least a small portion of what's coming?
Yeah, I want to start with one of the things you mentioned a moment ago of, the rosy reports. Oh, we can still change this, or, this is a new beginning and this kind of thing. I mean, it made my blood boil so much. Sorry about that, Will.
No, that was fine.
Because
Calm down.
it was the equivalent of if during Iraq, seeing one of the mainstream pieces of just vile propaganda saying, this is going to be good for the Iraqi people. We're going to bring them
democracy.
We're going to bring them democracy. We're going to bring them a better life.
Yeah.
And that boiled my blood enough to do such a crazy asinine thing as just go from Denali straight into Baghdad. And because that kind of lying kills people.
Yeah,
it killed
does.
1 million Iraqis.
Yep.
And it displaced several million more. And so that's why I get really angry when I see it. And so the same thing with the climate. Another analogy that I use is, if you're going to go into the backcountry, do you not want the most accurate, updated topographical map by which to plan your trip?
Yep.
Even if that map's going to show, oh, that bridge is no longer there over that river, you're going to have to wade across it. Or, oh, there was an avalanche and there's not a trail there anymore. Yeah, that's a pain in the neck, but it's a lot better to know that's there. Maybe we can take a different route. Maybe we shouldn't take the trip at all.
Maybe we won't die. Yeah, it's...
Right, right. So, and I know this is why you do your work too, because we care about the truth, because we know, A, it's the moral right thing to do, but there are lives at stake.
Amen.
And so when we talk about these faux climate reports, or, these good news stories and this kind of thing, it just makes me nuts, because it's just propaganda, and again, it's probably a follow the money thing.
Well, so where do we go? Who are good sources for
So I do know a guy that writes a pretty good climate dispatch. So I write a monthly climate disruption dispatch, is what we call them, for Truth Out. And essentially what it is, and I'm doing a shameless self-plug here, but I take a lot of pride in them, because it is essentially a collation of the last 30 days of scientific studies and extreme weather events tied to climate disruption, which at this point, of course, all of them are. The only question is how much. And I divide it into an introductory section, and then the elements, earth, air, fire, water, and then I have a denial and reality section to close it out. And it's, on average, 2,500 words of overwhelming when you read it all at once, and it's just scientific studies.
Yeah.
I mean, I regularly get emails saying you're being too extreme, you're only citing these extreme studies, and then when I do decide to reply, if it's at least a level-headed email, I say, well, I'm the messenger. Please don't shoot the messenger. Consider the sources are, scientific studies published in obscure, unknown places like NASA, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and
Nature,
Nature, climate change, et cetera. So it's a valuable resource, and a lot of people rely on it at a monthly basis. It's very grim to read, it's hard to write, but a very, very useful source of the latest information. And I would add, too, that I think The Guardian does a fantastic job of climate change reporting, and they're a great source. And I would say even more recently, both the Washington Post and the New York Times have done a really good job of a big important study comes out, and they'll do a really good in-depth story on that study, interviewing lead authors, et cetera, et cetera. Like, for example, they did a great job in January of a study that came out in the Proceedings in National Academy of Sciences about the Antarctic that showed a six-fold increase in melting since just 1970, and that was in the New York Times.
At Truth Out, when one of Dahr's dispatches comes in for review, the rest of us in the organization are always of two minds. One half of our mind is, oh, awesome, Dahr's got a new report in. And the other half is, oh God, Dahr's got a new report in. And there goes my day. But it's required reading.
Thank you.
What this man does is absolutely required reading. And if you're going to wrap your mind around what's been happening, what has already happened, and what is going to continue to happen, rely on this man as I have for as long as I have. He's the kind of journalist that we need, as I said before.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
So last question, I guess. Really not since a few long moments during the Cold War, where we, as a species, were staring down nuclear annihilation, have we, as a creature on this planet, faced collectively the possibility of our own extinction. It's a math problem. It's a scientific problem in every sense of the word, but it's also an affliction of the spirit to encompass the reality of this, that even if somehow, the Rachel Carson quote that I gave, what if I never see this again? So you speak a lot, and you speak wonderfully and eloquently in that book about grief, about taking on the grief of the loss that's coming our way. And I would just like to ask you to speak a little bit about that, because for me personally, that was the most compelling part. I mean, the information about what's happening around the world, it makes you want to hide under the bed, but it's how it moves people personally and how they choose to deal with the reality that is before us, that is going to make or break how this situation unfolds. And I'd just like you to talk about the aspect of grief as it pertains to the situation that we find ourselves in.
Well, it wasn't by design that I was forced headlong into dealing with my own grief. It started back in 2013 when I wrote that article I mentioned for Tom Englehart's website. I wrote that article. It's extremely grim, talks about the possibility of human extinction, and found myself pretty much curled up on the floor for the next 2 months. I went into a depression. I didn't know what to do. And I had then to start figuring out, how am I going to be during this time? And it's another thing that Stan Rushworth had shared with me, that some of his friends and elders had shared with him, as it comes down to, how are we going to choose to comport ourselves during this time? And that means for me facing honestly what's happening, and that entails all the feelings that are going to come with it, the despair, the rage at those responsible, the complexity of that, of my own hypocrisy, of still flying, of still using fossil fuels. Yes, I live in a solar-powered house. Yes, I grow my own food. Yes, I ride a bike, and I still drive. Yeah. And so how do you tease out all this stuff on a daily basis? I mean, it feels like stepping in and out of the matrix on a regular basis. So it's a lot of grief work. And what happened was, I think, interestingly, if you'll forgive me a little bit of a tangent, but when I started writing this book, my original design was, and what I went into Marfa with in 2015 was, it's going to be like 75% climate dispatch and 25% nature writing and like my own experience going out into the field. But then when I actually started writing the book, it flipped it. And I attribute that to the earth. Like, the earth literally started, I started writing about this stuff, and those of us who engaged in writing and art know, like, once you get into the zone, it has a mind of its own. You're just the typist, or you're just along for the ride. And that's what happened, is I'd go to these places and I'd be taking these notes, and then I'd be writing this up, and the place started coming through, and all of that then brought the feelings, and it forced the issue of, what am I going to do? How am I going to be? And by the end of the book, literally, it got to a point where I had the book done, and I literally was doing final edits, and something had told me. I was actually in a workshop working on grief, and that's when I met Stan. And as a Vietnam vet, he and I did some work together on PTSD and grief. And I had not edited my last chapter. I had it done, and I was literally going to just do the final edits. I was 10 days before deadline, and something said, wait. And then Stan and I did some work together, and I knew, on the one hand, it was like this oh shit moment. I have the ending of the book completely wrong. And I had to rewrite the last 10 pages completely
you
of the
had 10
book.
days.
Yeah, 10 days, no problem. And so I did. And then the ending of the book is as it is, and it comes in directly to deal with all of this grief in the magnitude of staring possibly our own oblivion in the face, and what does it mean to younger generations, and what does it mean to all these unsuspecting species that are just victims of what has been done to the planet by this insane industrial growth society. And I have had to learn to be broken open over and over and over. I can't give this talk without crying. I can't give this talk without reading those quotes from Virtek and his heartbreaking, and all these scientists in this book. At some point, it comes up, and it came up in the field with them, and it comes up. And the thing is, though, we share that, and we do this together, and that's the reconnection. And it's the reconnection that has been lost. It's the reconnection with each other, and it's most importantly the reconnection to the earth. Because I do believe, like what Dr. Mosqueda said, it's that fundamental disconnection from the planet that is the root cause of climate disruption. And we can all start making that reconnection right now with each other and with the earth.
How then shall we live?
How then shall we live?
Dahr Jamail.
Well done, brother.
I'm going to hug you. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much.